Edward Palmer was 62 years old when he realized the world no longer waited for men like him. He had spent most of his life drifting between responsibilities he never fully owned, choices he made half-heartedly, and dreams he abandoned long before they could shape him. The modern world had tightened around him like the collar of a shirt too small for his age. Technology had surged forward, culture had shifted, and people no longer saw a man like Edward as someone with potential, only someone who had already lived out his chances. His days had fallen into a predictable rhythm: wake up alone in a quiet house in Eastbourne, put the kettle on, stare at the steam rising off the mug, and wonder what it would feel like to be needed again. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 10 years earlier, and without her, the room seemed hollow, the walls too wide, and the silence too thick. His son, Anthony, lived far away with a life too full for long phone calls, and Edward never wanted to be the kind of father who clung out of loneliness. The world expected him to settle into retirement, to sit quietly among newspaper clippings, afternoon radio, and memories. But retirement was for men who felt they had completed something. Edward did not feel that way. He felt unfinished, unproven, and somehow younger inside than his thinning hair and stiff knees suggested. One rainy morning, while sorting through old papers in the attic, he found an unopened letter addressed to him from years earlier from a local community center. It was an invitation to an open day for volunteers and job seekers. He sat on the attic floor staring at it, feeling a strange pull in his chest. The event itself had happened long ago, but the idea of it, the possibility of being part of something, stayed with him long after he folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen table. For the rest of the day, he walked through the house with the letter in his pocket, the weight of it reminding him of a forgotten door he had left closed for too long. By evening, he had made a decision entirely foreign to him. He would try applying for a job. Not a career, not a reinvention, just something that made him feel like he belonged somewhere again. The next morning, he took the bus into town. He wore his better coat, the one Margaret always said made him look respectable. It was still draped with memories of her warm praise. He walked down the high street, noticing how quickly people moved now. They carried coffee cups, spoke into Bluetooth earbuds, and typed on their phones without breaking stride. Edward, meanwhile, walked slower, his hands deep in his pockets, quietly observing. He felt like a ghost walking among the living. He stopped in front of a small charity shop tucked between a bakery and a pharmacy. The sign in the window read, "Volunteers needed, part-time paid positions available." He stood there for a long moment, staring at the sign as if it were meant only for him. Inside, bells on the door jingled as he entered. The shop smelled of old clothes, wooden shelves, and something floral, perhaps from a donated bottle of perfume that had spilled somewhere. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 50s with glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Her name badge read Linda. She looked up with a warm but professional expression. "Good morning, can I help you?" Edward nodded, clearing his throat before his voice found its strength. "I saw the sign in the window." Her eyebrows lifted gently. "Are you interested in volunteering or the part-time positions?" He hesitated. A lifetime of feeling unqualified had trained him to undersell himself. But something inside him, a flicker of Margaret's old encouragement, pushed him forward. "Part-time, if that's possible." Linda smiled, not the kind of smile people give out of obligation, but one that held genuine welcome. "Of course, let's have a chat." They talked at a small round table near the back of the shop. Linda asked him about his experience, though he had little to offer that fit neatly into lines on a CV. He had worked odd jobs in his youth: delivery driver, groundskeeper, temporary laborer, but nothing that resembled what people today would call a career. But Linda didn't seem bothered by that. She asked him about himself instead, his reliability, his willingness, how he handled responsibility. And Edward, surprised by the kindness in her approach, answered honestly. When they finished, Linda folded her hands and said, "We could use someone like you. If you're available to start this week, you're hired." He sat there blinking, unsure whether he had heard correctly. Hired at 62. For the first time in years, something in him lifted, as though a tight knot in his chest had finally loosened. On his first day, he felt nervous despite the simplicity of the tasks. The shop was quiet when he arrived, the morning sun barely touching the tops of the bookshelves. Linda greeted him, handed him a small badge with his name printed neatly on it, and showed him the back room where he would be sorting donations. The room was cluttered with bags of clothes, boxes of old crockery, toys with missing parts, and books whose pages carried the faint scent of dust and time. His job was straightforward: inspect donated items, decide what could be sold, and organize them accordingly. It was simple work, but it felt important. Every item came with a story, even if it was a silent one. He found himself imagining the lives behind the donated goods: a family downsizing, a widow parting with belongings too heavy to keep, children giving away toys they had outgrown. Each object seemed to hold whispers of unknown lives, and Edward found comfort in imagining them. He treated every donated item with a careful gentleness, something Linda noticed early on. By afternoon, the other volunteers drifted in. Most were younger than him, college students fulfilling placement requirements, retirees who already had full lives and simply wanted to stay busy, and a young mother looking for a sense of community. At first, Edward felt out of place, but slowly he blended into the rhythm of the shop. People began greeting him by name. They asked him how his weekend was. One of the students brought him a pastry one morning, saying, "You always help us with the heavy boxes." For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was part of something ordinary and human. Weeks passed, then months. The shop had become a second home to him. He knew where every item belonged, how to price second-hand coats, and which customers liked to chat versus those who preferred quiet browsing. He especially enjoyed watching couples shop for antique teacups or young parents choosing affordable books for their children. The shop was full of little moments that stitched themselves into the tapestry of his days. But the best part, the part he never expected, was how people began relying on him. Linda often said, "If Edward's here, everything will be all right," whenever the stockroom grew too cluttered or the customers too many. She said it with a light laugh, but he felt proud every time she did. He helped arrange displays, carried heavy boxes, repaired furniture that came in slightly broken, and once even restored a donated radio that everyone assumed was unsalvageable. He felt useful, steady, present. He was no longer drifting. One cold afternoon in late November, as he was polishing a set of vintage brass candlesticks, a young man entered the shop. He hesitated near the doorway before walking directly toward Edward, who was arranging items on a shelf. "Excuse me," the young man said softly. "Are you Mr. Palmer?" Edward turned, surprised. "Yes, I am." The young man shifted nervously. "My mom told me to find you. You helped her last week. She said you carried her boxes to the car and stayed with her while she cried." Edward remembered her, a woman in her 40s who seemed fragile, like she was holding herself together with sheer will. Her husband had recently passed away, and she had brought in a few of his belongings because she couldn't bear to keep everything. The young man continued, "She wanted me to tell you that you made her feel less alone that day." Edward felt something tighten in his throat. He had not done anything remarkable, just a small kindness, but the young man's gratitude struck him deeply. After he left, Edward sat quietly in the stockroom for a moment, looking at his hands, the same hands that had once built model-like dreams he never pursued. Now they were doing something simpler, but perhaps more meaningful. He had never been anyone extraordinary, but perhaps he didn't need to be. Winter settled over the town with its usual heaviness. Frosted windows, shorter days, and long shadows stretching across the pavements. The charity shop stayed warm inside, its soft lights glowing against the cold world beyond its doors. One evening, as he locked up after closing, Linda approached him with a small envelope. "We're giving you a raise," she said. "Just a little something for all you do." Edward shook his head. "I don't need—" "But we need you," she replied gently, "and we want you to feel valued." He looked at the envelope, then at Linda, and felt a deep, steady warmth spread through him. Not pride, but something softer, gratitude, belonging. He had spent a lifetime believing he had nothing of worth to give, and now, in a small shop with flickering lights and donated goods, he had found a place where every effort mattered. Spring arrived slowly, with early blossoms appearing like small promises. Edward continued working at the shop, moving with a steadiness that felt newly earned. The volunteers laughed with him now, not at him. Customers asked for him by name. He had a routine, a purpose, a life. Not a perfect one, not an extraordinary one, but a life that felt lived. He still missed Margaret every day. Some mornings he spoke to her picture on the mantel, telling her about the shop, the people, the funny things that happened. He liked to imagine she was listening, smiling her familiar smile. But now, the grief wasn't a weight that pushed him down. It walked beside him instead, a quiet companion. His first job, late as it came, had given him something he never expected to find again: connection. Not to career paths or ambitions, but to people, to humanity, to the gentle rhythm of being part of something that mattered. One morning in early summer, as he arranged a new display of secondhand books, he paused, letting his fingers brush across the worn spines. Sunlight streamed through the window, warm and golden. Outside, people passed by, laughing, chatting, living their lives. Edward stood there, absorbing the moment. He had spent so many years believing his chance at life had slipped away unnoticed. But here he was, at 62, living a chapter he hadn't expected. And though no one else might ever write about him, he knew, finally, that his story still mattered. Not because it was grand, but because it was his.